In South Africa, millions of poor and vulnerable people do not have access to adequate housing and also cannot access adequate water, electricity, sanitation, and waste removal. Because of these living conditions, it is extremely difficult for those people to escape poverty. We have decided to disseminate the right to adequate housing because adequate housing contributes to the quality of life for everyone. The right to adequate housing is not only a constitutional right, but it is seen as one of the 7 focal areas that the South African Human Rights Commission focuses on to protect, promote, and mandate human rights in our country.
After a hard-working day, one relies on the comfort and safety of one's home. As Matthew Desmond once said, housing is absolutely essential to human flourishing. Without stable shelter, it all falls apart. The latest statistic of 2016's data shows that there are about 3.3 million people in informal settlements. This includes those living in short-term relocation areas. Section 26 subsection 1 of the Constitution in particular states that everyone has the right to have access to adequate housing, while also stating that the state with its available resources should achieve the realization of this right. The term everyone refers to every person in South Africa, upon whom the rights in the Bill of Rights applies. In order to achieve this, the state has developed pieces of legislation such as the Housing Act. There are certain criteria that must be met in order for a house to be adequate and habitable. These include security of tenure, availability of services, materials, facilities and infrastructure, etc. The right to adequate housing in South Africa is recognized as a social economic right. The right to own property is protected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other human rights treaties, where the right to adequate housing is aimed at ensuring that everyone has a safe, habitable place to live in freedom and with dignity, as stated in Section 10 of the Constitution.
We live in a society where we are surrounded by people living in harsh conditions and where the rights to adequate housing are being violated. Therefore, it was an extremely difficult decision to decide on a specific target group, but we chosen the Airport Valley Warmer Township. We also decided to make this video and a poster to show that we can reach out to more people. We as a group came up with the phrase, "Don't lack the right to adequate housing," so that we could engage with our target group by providing them with information on the right to adequate housing and what steps they need to take to ensure that their right is being protected and not violated.
Who has failed? In South Africa, the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, who is responsible for the municipalities, obliges the government, alongside South Africa's constitution, to provide social housing for the indigenous people of South Africa. A report in 2015 confirmed that people who are relocated to temporary areas end up living there forever. The government, in terms of Section 26 of the Constitution, mandates the state to take responsibility and legislative measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization to the right of housing. To give effect to this obligation, the state has enacted various pieces of legislation, including the Housing Act 107 of 1997. The national government must establish and facilitate a sustainable national housing development process. As part of the municipality's process of integrated development planning, it must take all reasonable and necessary steps within the framework of 40 national and provincial housing legislation to ensure that the inhabitants of its area have access to adequate housing on a progressive basis. What needs to happen? There are policy guidelines which local government is compelled by to illustrate how this will be achieved in 3 steps. The first step is to relocate the people living in a specific area to a temporary area whilst maintaining the area, then relocating the affected people to permanent housing. It is of vital importance that the community must decide the time frames for the allocation of permanent housing. In recent studies conducted, it has been found that between 2.9 and 3.6 million people still live in informal settlements in South Africa today. The research further indicated that more than 1 million people who are beneficiaries of state subsidies houses do not have title deeds for their houses. In South Africa, evictees who can't afford their homes because of rising rent and under-regulated private property market continue to be placed in isolated relocation camps in ways that are like apartheid-era relocations. The effect of the apartheid-era relocations, meanwhile, are yet to be addressed in any significant way 25 years into democracy.
In conclusion, the right to adequate housing is entrenched in Section 26 of the Constitution. Adequate housing and human dignity overlaps in numerous situations. In other words, by not having a habitable home, it also infringes the right to human dignity. It is a positive obligation on the state to provide South African citizens with adequate housing. By not having running water, by not being safe from cold weather, by not having sanitation, etc., all constitutes an infringement on the right to adequate housing. However, if there is an infringement on Section 26, the Human Rights Commission can also be helpful. A telephone number for the Human Rights Commission was provided for on the poster. We as a group disseminated Section 26 to our target group, which is Airport Valley Warmer Township, by posters posted onto social media and by a video. Do not lack your basic human right to adequate housing.